Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hello, Abigail. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Mimi, thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to you. I'm so happy that I got the opportunity because I'm actually a really big fan of your work. I love the Love Boat Taipei series and the show on Netflix. So very excited for this conversation.
Oh, me too.
So, congratulations on your new book and short film as well, The Veil. Amazing. Yes, behind you. So much creativity and imagination in this one. And I was kind of speaking to you off air, but I was very excited also that you are doing your directorial debut and that you've got Lea Salonga in the film. Like, how incredible is that?
Oh, yeah, she is so wonderful. She's incredible. She's getting her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, like well deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, longtime fan, of course, of her
hmm
amazing voice. But I was sharing with you, we have a little Mulan connection, and I've gotten to meet, our third counterpart, the main counterpart of Ming Na Wen, and I still haven't met Lea Salonga. So maybe one day we'll have like a Mulan reunion, which would be kind of amazing.
That would be amazing.
So, I've directed one film and it was like, oh my goodness, such an undertaking. But I've never even written a book, and I feel like that's even more daunting. But what was it like for you to kind of switch hats? Was it like a really easy transition? And I know that you also have a film background and understanding, but it is still, I mean, it's a big deal, especially with, Lea Salonga in it and having all of this kind of pressure. What was it like to switch gears for you?
Yeah, so for all of my creative work, it's been a gradual evolution. So I wrote The Veil 10 years ago. It's about an inventor family that creates an AI generated virtual fantasy world. And it was too early to publish. My agent at the time was like, what is this? What is AI generation? I can't get behind this. So the book never even saw the light of day. It never went out to publishers, nothing. But during that time, I wrote Love Boat Taipei, and it became the movie Love in Taipei, which is now on Netflix worldwide. And that's where I really cut my teeth on learning how to make a movie. Like I was there from start to finish. I was on set the whole time in Taipei and then in London for reshoots. And I learned everything. I'm like a, big student my whole life. And so I just met everybody, learned everything. And I was interested in directing. I found myself like with all the movies that I watched, I would always watch like the little interviews at the end with the directors, and I was always fascinated. And so for me, it ends up being a very natural transition. So I wrote the screenplay for a short film prequel to The Veil, it takes place 7 years before the events of the book when the kid is 5, 6 years old. His family has a miscarriage, and that's when, to come out of his grief, he starts to draw and create this world, a world that belongs all to him, and it's populated by these little elves. The most important of is Nomli. So Nomli is kind of like a surrogate little brother to him. And I find like when you write a screenplay, it is basically directing because you're writing like, what does the
Yes.
production designer do? How do the actors like portray the character? And there's always feedback you get. You've probably seen like as a screenwriter, you let the actors act. You don't want to over direct them as a screenwriter, but
Right.
you also don't want to over direct them as a director.
hmm
And so I think I just kind of took all those same sensibilities, and I know this world so well that it was just a very natural segue for me to go ahead and just start to like create the scenes in the physical world for the camera.
It makes a lot of sense too, because this has literally been your baby for 10 years that you've been nurturing. And for you to be able to see it come to life, I'm sure it was really exciting to see everything in your head, not just on the page, but actually literally coming to life. That must have been fantastic. I know that you have a very strong background in tech and having, this concept of AI being that you knew about it 10 years before everybody else. But it was this kind of second nature to you as well, because I'm always really interested in that research process. I talk to a lot of comic creators. I try to collaborate, and I find it fascinating the depths of research these authors do to create a book or a graphic novel or et cetera. And this one though was a little, I don't want to say easy, because obviously any writing of a novel is complicated, but would you say there was just like a more natural progression in the same way the directing was for you compared to your other books, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I always advise people to write what you know, and I do actually love technology. I've always been fascinated by it from an outsider's perspective. Like when I went to Harvard, I met all these kids from California who worked at like the big tech companies, and I was like, no way, that's so cool. Like I thought that was cooler than like anything else. And so I think I bring that fascination like into my work, and then as I worked for many years as a lawyer, and then I worked in venture capital and I worked in artificial intelligence. And that's what I knew. Like, and because of my interest in the area, I ended up growing a portfolio of AI startup companies, and I was seeing all this cool new technology being incubated, went to all the conferences. And so I think the story did naturally just kind of grow out of that. Like it's an inventor family. And I
Mhm.
think it's in some ways derived from my own family. We sit around the table and it's like our little laboratory, our workshop where we share ideas with each other, our stories, our technologies. We debate the ethics of AI. We debate privacy laws and what the laws should be, right? So that incubator community within my own family, I think is in some ways is like the Lee family. But yeah, I think this story also just draws from things I love personally. So I love fantasy books. In some ways, even though the Love Boat Taipei books are they're grounded in the real world and they're contemporary. I think of them as a fantasy book because it's about a girl who goes to another world. Everyone goes from Ohio to Taipei to learn language and culture, and that's what you do in a fantasy world. You go through a
Mhm.
portal into this other world with all these different rules and costumes and food and language and mores, and you come back to your ordinary world transformed. And that's exactly the journey of Ever in Love Boat Taipei. And so for the Veil, this boy gets to take his love for stories and fantasy and world building and actually build his own fantasy world.
Mhm.
So that's the Veil.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask you a bunch of very annoying, geeky AI. Like, I have a whole slew of questions for you. But before I jump into that, as you know, as a martial artist growing up in a martial arts world, it was very male dominated, and so I was really excited about your choice as well to feature a lot of female strong characters, hackers, creators. Often what you don't see them as portrayed as much, and I was curious with your personal experience, before jumping into the book, it's like you've worked in all these different things that you just kind of mentioned earlier from law to tech. Did you find yourself in spaces where because you were a female, you weren't treated equally and that you did have to kind of prove yourself? And does that, obviously play into the way that you write your characters?
Absolutely. So I joke that if I had gotten a book deal 10 years ago, then I wouldn't have had the career that I had. I was just waiting for that book deal. But I'm glad now in retrospect that I did come through Silicon Valley. I just eventually rose through the ranks. But
Yeah.
I would say I've been through everything an Asian American girl would go through in the corporate world. So, and some of that is actually just not being acknowledged or recognized for leadership. I remember the first time I told my then manager that I wanted to manage, he was very confused. And he was like, "You mean people?" Like it just, he could not fathom that I would be a manager of people. I remember another time our China team invited me to speak in China, and everyone was very excited about it. I was going to speak on artificial intelligence. And I'd sent over the bio, the headshots, they were getting ready for it. And then this white man in my department took the role away from me. He took the speaking opportunity away from me and gave it to a white woman. And he said, she has a resume that would be impressive in China. And I remember just thinking, like, whoa, like this guy, he was like, he'd never been to China himself. And I actually had to say, which was so hard for me as an Asian woman, I had to say, I too have a resume that would be impressive in China. And it was so hard. But I would find like over the years, like, I had to do that. Like I had to speak up for myself, which was so counter to our culture.
Yes.
And also that I had to do it twice as much as anybody else because I was being underestimated over and over again. So
Yeah.
the third thing that I really experienced is like just I didn't have a promotion for I think
Mhm.
7 years, 8 years. And I would
Wow.
find out later in talking with my friends that this was very common for women after having children. And that's true. That was the period after I'd had children. And part of it is I didn't care to get a promotion. I was just like heads down, taking care of my little kids and trying to stay in my job and do a good job. And so I didn't have time to network and do all those other things that actually are important to getting promoted and getting your work
Yeah.
known. But it was also like I found like my other Asian American girlfriends from Harvard and I, we started opening up to each other and we said, like, I can't get promoted. I can't get
Mm.
a title. I can't get any more money, right?
Yeah.
And once we saw the other people saying it, we're like, wait a sec, like there's something wrong here. Why are we all having the same problem when you were the smartest girl in our class at Harvard? And so we were able to see for each other what we couldn't see for ourselves. And that's when things all changed for us. We taught each other, like, how do you advocate for your job?
Yeah.
Some of us had managed men who were always, every day, were like, my job is important to me. My promotion's important to me. We just didn't know how to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think all that does appear in my works. And there's one experience in particular that does appear and inspired the veil. And that is, I didn't realize in the corporate world, people would take pre-meetings with me. Like these men would call me up, hey, let's have a pre-meeting. And they would pick my brain about the topic we were about to go into. And then in the next meeting, they would present everything we talked about as though it was their ideas. And I didn't know. I didn't even in that meeting, I didn't realize that's what was happening. I thought, oh, great, they really value like my input and insight. So they had a
Uh,
pre-meeting with me, and then they said all my ideas in the meeting. They didn't attribute me, but I was like, I don't need to be attributed. I'm just like I'm a team player. And so over time, this would happen over and over again, and I would actually hear about it from other people too, where people's ideas were taken and passed off as someone else's, and that happened
yeah.
all the time, like shamelessly. It was ridiculous. And so that trauma actually does inform like a core storyline of The Veil, which I won't spoil
Mm,
for other people, but
okay.
you having read the book, you can see where that's going.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because I'm hearing so many dual notes in there. And as an AAPI, growing up in Orlando, Florida, I was born in Boston, but we moved here when I was very small, so I did not have the Chinatown where my parents moved from. And growing up in a place where I was very, very much the minority, I'm really interested in your experiences as well because I feel like it probably was both, right? Like one, you were a woman, but two, you're also an Asian American, which are presented as like we're the docile and very submissive, and that we're not going to be outspoken. I actually one of the other hats I wear is I was the director for Make Us Visible Florida, which is a nationwide coalition, and we passed a law in a couple years ago to mandate AAPI history to be taught in our K through 12 curriculum because I grew up not learning anything about Asian American history and or that Asians were important in American history. And so having not seen myself reflected, it was very important to me that I advocated for this. And so I'm very curious anytime I get the opportunity to speak with someone who has worked so hard and overcome so many things, like what was your experience like as an Asian American growing up and in where you were?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio, but not very
Mhm.
many Asian Americans at all. In my
Ah,
class,
yes.
there was me, and there was a girl who was half Korean, and then there were
Okay.
actually a smaller but more sizable community of South Asians. It made me very conscious of being different and who, and like so very. It forced me to really self-reflect and understand like what my identity was as someone who's Asian and American. And I didn't really understand for a long time that I was the kid of immigrants. Actually, when I saw Beauty and the Beast, and they portrayed Belle as like being from the big city who moved to a rural small town. Like, oh, okay, I actually experienced some of that too, I think. So I think that's probably the main thing is like I understood I was more self-aware, but also that I grew up in Ohio, and so I am able to write stories that connect with people around the country.
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't know would be so valuable, but it's partly I think why Love Boat Taipei has been able to resonate across cultures, across languages. It's now been translated into 12 languages and more
Amazing.
around the world. So I think that was a benefit of growing up in a place where I was like very much like the middle of America. And,
Mhm.
it's a safe place generally. It was hard to be under scrutiny and under the microscope. But as I grew older, like some of the things that made me uncomfortable, people saying ni hao to me used to be
Yes.
this like sore point, right? And now when I go abroad, I hear like in Europe, for example, they when they find out you're from Italy, they'll say buongiorno. When they find out you're from
Yes.
France, they'll say bonjour. And I think it's like it can be done in a kind of antagonistic way, but it
Yes.
can also just be a way of people trying to relate. And yes, it's true. I'm not from China and I was born in America, but it's not their fault necessarily that they don't realize that if they just haven't seen someone like me. And so I think that has been healing for me too, to go from those like original traumas to realizing like a lot of it is not ill-intended. And there's so many other battles that are worth picking and not those ones.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that's a really great example because there's always intent, right? Words have power, but the
Hmm.
intention behind the words, and I think it's like you said, obvious when someone's saying it to you because they're trying to make fun of you or you're getting, kind of the jargon that's definitely meant to make fun of. But I feel like now language especially is less of a barrier that we all have like a translator on our phone and we're trying
Hmm.
to connect more with people. I find that to be very encouraging. But I love, back to your book, I always kind of try to take myself as a teacher because I teach students and everything. I'm like, okay, what are the kids going to take away from this? And, what do you hope, I guess, young females will take away, especially, being a female writer? One, for women to be seeing you as a role model, knowing like, hey, I could write a novel. I could have the fantasies that are happening in my head and all this creativity kind of coming out. What are you hoping that they take away in terms of seeing themselves represented in your book? Because you have also a very diverse group of characters, not just female strong, but you have the neurodivergent. You have so many different things happening there.
Absolutely. So, I love the character that Lea Salonga plays. It's our Addie Lee, the mom character, mom of Bran. She's a roboticist. She's also at the center of a love triangle. And I love that character because it's very true. There's a lot of professional, highly educated, brilliant Asian American women, and we don't often get to see that portrayed in an intimate way. Sometimes the side character, like the side doctor or
Yes.
the sidekick, but she's like a front and center person in the story. And I love that too, like that you can be the star, you can be the main character, you can take up space. I also have Piper Longfellow, who is half Cuban American, and she's a princess. Like she's from an elite Cuban family, an elite Boston family on her dad's side, and she's a little bit intimidating to Brand, but she's an ally, and she's brilliant also. She can solve 4x4 Rubik's cubes, and she's a hacker. And so I love that her character coming alongside Bran and being a part of his world on equal footing with him.
Yeah. And one thing that I love is because I'm this just always in my head, but as a kung fu teacher, I bring everything back through and I'm thinking, all right, well, one of the main goals we do when we study is like we tell our students that the main goal is to become a better human. So we always ask our students, what kind of person are you becoming through this practice? And so I was curious for you, like knowing so much that you do about AI, if AI were like a practice, what kind of humanity do you hope it nurtures in our next generation? You have all these themes of, I think you call it clean AI, and I love that this is not this dystopian take of of AI because we have enough of that, and we're already a little bit in a dystopia sometimes, I think, and we could all use a little bit of hope. So, I mean, how do you think that, you know, our humanity can really help shape, that next generation?
I think part of the fun of the Veil is it's a world where human creativity can flourish. Like it all is out of Brand's imagination, and with his
Mhm.
imagination, his drawings, his the things that he creates in the world, AI enables his imagination to become bigger and richer and more interesting. But at the core of it, it's still about a human person and the soul of that human person being expressed in this other alt art medium. And I think the other thing this story raises is like, what is our relationship to technology and what is our relationship to humanity? And really,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, like humans will disappoint us. And that's partly what drives Bran into the Vale. Like the world is scary. Human interactions are hard. Kids pick on him. They don't understand him. He's more comfortable living in this virtual world. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, it's also humans that you can it's only with humans that you can have a true relationship with. Even though we have a fun like world of the Vale and these characters are important and they have their own journey. At the end of the day, for Bran, the only real relationships he can have are with humans. And I think that's part of the journey that I hope my readers come through too.
Yeah, I love that you actually said that because I completely agree as somebody who's very, tactile and I'm very much an in-person kind of human. But like we are hearing these really interesting things about AI, right? Like reports that humans are falling in love with their AI or having therapy with their AI and having these relationships that are very much what you would think only could happen between humans. So do you think this is gonna like continue down this path, or do you think it's kind of like the MySpace that became the Facebook that became the thing, you think it'll kind of evolve into something else? Like, do you feel like this can actually replace traditional human romances as a romance novelist as well? I'm very curious as to your take on that.
Yeah, I think there's a danger that we think it can replace the relationships because the AI is pretty good. Like I ask it questions now and it's parroting the collective wisdom of the internet. And there's plenty of writings out there from psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists sharing their musings on the world and books and so all that is collected in this hive mind that we're interacting with. And so I think there is a risk that we can think of that is fulfilling. And the same thing happens to Bran, as you know, in the Vale. But at the same time, there are limits. It's not a real person. You can't go and meet in person. You can't actually have a true long-term relationship. And they only grow. It can't really grow with you. It grows like, with the collective. It grows according to technology. So I worry that it's a temptation, because the world is hard, but I also think that's why we have to try extra hard to connect with other people.
Yeah, I was kind of one of those very averse to social media, and I was like, I would rather pick up the phone and call my friend, but I feel like I'm at that age though where that's still relevant, and we're always trying to encourage our students to have those human connections and things like that. And I think you're
Yeah.
right, it's just going to take more effort.
But it
And
can, it enhances us too. Like I actually love
yes.
Facebook allows me to keep in touch with so many people that I wouldn't have capacity to keep in touch with one-on-one. And so then when we do have an opportunity to connect, and it's like we have a little bit of history to build upon still.
Yeah, and so it's like using it for good.
Enabling, yeah,
Like
just it has to like kind of back to what I said initially, it has to enable the humanity. That's what technology needs to do.
yeah, yeah, that's really, really well put. I often get pretty overwhelmed by it. Like I've, okay, check my grammar and things like that, but I'm like, I don't want to become lazy. I want to rely on trying to still have critical thinking, and I feel like there's this kind of balance, like you said, to leaning on it or using it for good and having the clean AI in our lives. But even so, like I can get pretty overwhelmed and I have to kind of take a step away. I have my martial practice that I do that kind of keeps me from getting overwhelmed. Do you actually get overwhelmed by it as well? Like the dark side of the possibilities? Or because you're so knowledgeable, you're like, no, I know that we can, use it for good, have responsible, usage, etc. And I don't know. I was just curious if like you also get overwhelmed like the rest of us and in this like I said, sometimes I think the silence are really coming. So I'm a little bit, I
Mm-hmm.
can get kind of stressed out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I don't get overwhelmed in the sense that like it's been here for a long time and I'm used to it. Like I know it's
Yeah,
seeping into everyone's lives. Like that's what I saw 10 years ago. It was already everywhere and like people
correct.
just didn't know. So, and I do think that it's important to equip ourselves. And that's partly why I wrote the book. I wanted to equip my readers, my young readers and my young at heart readers to take advantage of the potentials of this technology. It's powerful and it's here to stay, but also be aware of some of the pitfalls around it. And so I think the more equipped we are, and maybe to your point, like the more we know and understand this technology, the better we are able to address it and head on. So, for example, like I don't think the copyright issues have been worked out. I see the train is like moving faster and faster, and I think there's a lot of people who are hoping it will just resolve itself because it's too late. Everything's been trained on everything. But I know, there's lawsuits out there, there's people thinking through the copyright issues. And so that for that reason, I never use AI in anything that I'm selling publicly, anything that appears publicly in my films. But I do think there are ways that AI can make our lives easier. Writing, drafting emails to just give you something to work off of, drafting reports, expense reports, like things that are not fun to write. It can give legal advice, but you have to be very careful and actually check it with a lawyer if you're not a lawyer. But for me, since I am a lawyer, it actually is
Right.
really helpful to check, like, just check my judgment. Am I, do I remember that correctly? Or has the law
Yeah.
changed on this area? It's like a young associate. Um, so there's so many ways that I think we can learn to take advantage of these tools,
Mhm.
um, while still making sure that we, whatever industry we're in, are using it ethically and with integrity.
Yeah. And so I'm really curious as well for you. Like you said, you had this career but were you writing all throughout your career as well? Because it sounds like your career was pretty busy. So how long has this, process been? Because I know this book was here and then you've done other books and everything like that. I mean, have you always wanted to have this type of, writing career or were you just pulled in different directions or you just kind of good at so many things and
Yeah, no, I really did always write. And
okay.
I like, so I joke, like, if I had a book deal sooner, then I wouldn't have this
Yes,
career.
yes.
So it's funny, I always say 10 years, but it's actually been longer now. I think it's been 18 years since I first started writing my first novel. And I sent it out in the world. I wrote it actually, I was thinking of being a law professor. And then I just couldn't bring myself to take the final step. I'd done everything else. I'd clerked on the DC circuit and I'd worked for Sullivan and Cromwell for a couple years. And I'd written a student article that won a national award. The next thing would be to write the big long article, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I had this idea for a fantasy novel, which actually there's some resemblance to The Veil. And my husband was like, "You're so excited about this. Why don't you just try it?" Right. And so I did. And it came pouring out of me. But it would take me 10 years after that to publish Love Boat Taipei. I buried 5 novels on the way. So during that period that I was writing those 5 novels, I had this other career. But I took a smaller career. I chose to leave the big law firm and go in-house to a venture capital fund. And it was like it was a much easier job for me as a lawyer. I had more control over my schedule and I could raise my kids and do the writing on the side. And what I find too, actually, I've left the corporate world. I left about 4 years ago now to do the film for Lebo Taipei and also write the books. And I find that I don't write more. I write about 3 hours a day, and that's really what most writers will cap out at. But I can edit forever and I can work on the film stuff forever. So I I don't know that I would have been any more productive on the books because I just had to write that first novel that got published, and that was 3 hours a day, and I could do that alongside the other things that I was doing.
Wow, you make it sound like such a quote unquote easy discipline, but I'm like, I can imagine myself sitting there for 3 hours and be like, yeah, well, haven't gotten anything done yet. I'm sure it happens because everybody has those days where maybe the creativity's not there, maybe you didn't sleep right. I mean, I've asked a lot of writers, what is their go-to for their writer's block or however you want to call it, or if you've reframed it as something else, but do you just step away from it, or do you have a technique that you go to get your creativity back in, or is it technical for you? Like you have such great technicality and discipline. Does that allow you to push through?
No, no, I definitely hear you. I have to go away for the big, deep work.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll go on like a retreat.
Mm.
I spent a year in Vienna, Austria with my daughter, who is a composer, and
Oh,
that year I wrote two novels because I was just away from the world. It
wow.
was right, it was between my second book launch and the launch of the Love in Taipei movie, so I could be anywhere in the world. It was perfect timing. But now, like even now, like I'm in the final, like we're speaking at a time when I'm 6 weeks away from launch. Launch is September 16th of The Veil. And I'm like, it's insane. There's so many events, there's so many interviews, and it's hard for me to carve out time to do the writing. And so what I do is I find like as soon as I get up, before everyone else is awake, I just start writing because I know that once the day begins, I'm going to lose that writing time. So I'm able to get in a couple hours of just like trying to work through the creative work. And that usually works for me. If I can protect time in the morning, especially, that's when I'm freshest, then I can actually still make my incremental progress toward my goals. But it's hard, and inspiration is important too. And what I do is, as I get inspired all day long by just interacting with the world, I take notes on my iPhone, and I have like a whole many lists of like different categories for all the different ideas that come to me throughout the day, and I put them in there. And then when I sit down, either at night or in the morning, I can just go through all those ideas, and the inspiration is still there, and now I can organize it for the page.
Yeah, you're very organized, I can see.
No, no, I'm not. It's chaotic, but
Uh,
I have systems to create order
well,
from
you
the
have a system
chaos.
of chaos, which that works for me too. So,
Yeah.
I love how there's art in this book as well, which, as a huge comic lover and graphic novel lover, like I love that there's some really beautiful art and things like that. And I know there's more art coming in the hardcover, but um you also paint those pictures with your words, right? It's such a clear vision of the world and the characters. And were you always so creative, like just growing up? Were you always like having, fantasy worlds? Were you, the best I did, I think, is I had like a tent out of a sheet or something, right? But I definitely wasn't creating like fantasy worlds. Has this always because it sounds like you've always loved fantasy books as well. So talk to me about kind of like what the young Abigail was like as a child with fantasy worlds, but and also like even now, like how does that kind of play into your everyday life?
Yeah, so I used to tell stories to my brother and sister. They would come into my room and I would just tell them these stories. And I always started off with the group. They were called group stories. And it
Okay.
was featuring my brother, sister, and me, then our cousins, and then some of the friends that we made. And that group would kind of be about 12 people, and it would shift a little bit as we made new
Wow.
friends. And it would always start off in the forest. So the Vale takes place in a blue forest where we'd just be on adventures with no adults. And I do still have one story where we're all like imprisoned in pools, like swimming pools without water, very deep ones, so you can't actually climb out of it because the ladders are too high up. I've never written that into a story, but I feel like I will write that into a story
Okay.
someday.
I love it.
But yeah, but it was about kids having to be ingenious in a world without adults and being the heroes of their stories. And so I think that is actually true for every single one of my books. It's about young people kind of seizing the day, and really just accomplishing amazing things.
I love that it's always in a forest. Did you have a lot of like woods around in your childhood area that you were like, we're gonna go play in the woods and
We had we had
climb
like
trees?
we did have trees in our backyard. It was a very
Okay.
large, it was in some ways it was like as tall as a forest, like the very tall
Yeah.
tree, taller than
Well, to a
our
young child, it would feel that way, maybe. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, taller than a two-story house. And it was probably like the width of like a property, like one property length. That
Yeah.
was like Ohio, you had like lots of land. I think we
Yeah.
had a half an acre, which is not that big in Ohio, but it seems big like compared to where I live now in California.
Yeah.
So there was that, I guess. And then, but I think I just have an affinity for forests. Like
Mm,
I still like I remember the hikes that I took in Vienna. I remember like when I went to college at Harvard, we would go up to Maine and just see all the foliage and the colored
mm.
trees. So there's something about trees that I just adore.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's just such a like lineage type of thing. You know, it's like it's evergreen literally, and
Yeah,
there's so much there, and
right.
so much
History,
depth,
there's
poetry
some of
and
the,
history. Yeah, the
right,
trees have
redwood
seen way
forests.
more than than most of us will ever see.
Exactly. Yep.
That's why we have to protect our forests. So,
Absolutely.
um, I would love to talk a little bit about Love Boat because, you know, having been a fan, and I didn't even prep any questions, but I love that you also, you know, since you worked on the film and everything too, seeing that come to life must have been really exciting. And just even like the casting of it, because, you know, the characters in the book, and it's been a while since I've read it now, so it's not off the top of my head, but they're just so lovable and fun. And, you know, as an adult reading a young adult novel, which I do quite often, I guess it makes you want to relive a youth that you wish you kind of had. Like, oh, yeah, what? Because when I went to China, it was not like Taipei. I was there like to train kung fu, and it was pretty rough. So it was a different experience. And I would go, oh man, that looks like a lot more fun. And I really relate to not having good Chinese or having like a lack of understanding of all the traditions and the language. And, you know, because my mom is Chinese, but she's Jamaican. She was born and raised in Jamaica. And all my family
Hmm.
growing up in Florida were more of the Jamaican side. And so
That's
thank
so
goodness I had my
cool.
Kung Fu side because that was like
Uh-huh.
my Chinese tradition. But I, you know, my Chinese isn't great. And, you know, I've tried to learn as I've gotten older, but I really connected with that experience of, like you said, being in another world and looking Chinese or
Hmm.
looking, you know, like you're from where you're at, but then being very much like, no, you don't fit in here either. So, what kind of, I mean, you kind of answered earlier about like the fantasy of another place, but kind of what was the impetus for that storyline? Because I hear that there's also actual places like this in Asia.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it is an identity story at the core. And but it was such an unusual identity story. It's like, it's a story I think when I meet Love Boat alum, I find I meet people that are healed and they
Hmm.
have like a very strong sense of their identity and self. And I meet adults who are not healed, who have never had that opportunity to just reconcile like that they belong to two cultures and
Yeah.
that there's strength in both worlds. And yeah, I still remember asking someone because I used to hate it when people asked me where are you from because it assumed that I was other
Yeah.
and wasn't actually American born. But now I find because I travel so much internationally and I live in a city that is full of internationals, I often will say, "Where are you from?" But I remember saying it to a woman one time, and I could see this hurt look come over her face, and she's like, "I'm American," and I realized, oh, I used to be that way too. But I
Mm.
felt like I had an opportunity to heal from this and to receive those questions like as they are.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Love Boat did for me. Love Boat and similar experiences to Love Boat. So I grew up without any Asian Americans around me, but I did go to Chinese church. We drove half an hour just to
Oh,
go to this
okay.
Chinese church every Sunday. And that's like, it was all the Chinese people in like the greater Cleveland area. And I wasn't that close to them initially, but over time, like we would go on retreats together. That's where like you spend informal time together. And I got to like see these really cool Chinese people, Chinese Americans, and they knew stuff that I didn't. And so some of that is kind of what ends up in Ever Wong's experience. And she goes from Ohio to Taipei and meets these cool Asians who are just so in the know about pop stars and food and sites and history that she had no knowledge about. So I wanted to capture like all those learnings that I had, and kind of give them to Ever in something that like people could digest and relate to. But also like, a big part of that story is her relationship with her parents. And for so many years, I was like the disrespectful Asian American kid and just you wouldn't know that from the outside at school. I was the good kid, but like at home, I think I really bought into like the things, the racism that I saw around like impacting my parents. So they hit glass ceilings, they spoke with accents, so people thought they weren't intelligent. And I bought into that as a kid. And I'm ashamed of it. And I felt like it took me so many years to grow out of that, and to realize like, oh, people with accents, it's just their second language, right? That's why they
Yeah.
speak with an accent. And I sound even worse when I try to speak Chinese. And so that relationship with her parents was such an important part of the Love Boat Taipei stories too. And the South China Morning Post wrote my favorite review in that it was the first Asian American novel where the kids came to a deeper understanding of their parents. And that's Ever. She goes and she learns to stand up for what she believes in, but she also learns like the good that comes with her family, what they went through, how much they have sacrificed, and how much they love her, but also how to carry that burden because it can feel like a burden. And like how do you navigate that? So Yeah, I'm thankful that I was able to publish them. And as you know, there are three books now. There's a trilogy. Book two follows Sophie and Xavier on another journey, but we get to see what happens to Ever, Rick, and all the rest of the gang. And then the third book follows Ever's little sister Pearl on her own love boat journey. And Mark, who is one of the gang of five in book one, is now the dragon. And so there's a whole like an opportunity for so many more shenanigans.
I love it. And hopefully more Netflix shows or more, live action. So I'd love to see that develop. Yeah, it's been so much fun. And I think these stories are so important to be told. And thinking about what you said earlier, which was, hey, if your book had come out at an earlier time, et cetera, I just, having worked in film in the late 90s, early 2000s, I can tell you that I didn't have a positive experience, right? Like I didn't feel like I would not have seen the Love Boat Type A series on TV, or, you just don't really see yourself represented. And I feel like we finally are turning that corner where just, I mean, to me, you're living proof that your show is not just on air, but like widely accepted and enjoyed, not as just, oh, this is an Asian film. Like this is just a film about, young adults and things like that. So I feel like the timing is so perfect for the acceptance of that. I mean, do you feel like where we're at in terms of representation, especially for Asian Americans, whether it be in film or in books or, in mainstream media, do you see kind of the trend, and do you feel like we still have a long way to go, or do you feel like, we're finally, over the hump?
Yeah, yeah. So we definitely have had a big change even when I first started having conversations in Hollywood. So, so there's been a number of shows that have come out. There's Beef, there's American Born Chinese with Gene
Mhm.
Yang, chatting about earlier. There was The Brother's Son, Three Body Problem is Chinese, but that's it's been widely enjoyed. Then there's all this like cool stuff like out of Korea. I loved Squid Games and was totally obsessed. And of course now there's this K-pop. So it's encouraging that there's more content, but what we are finding now, and even just the past like a little more than half a year, is that people are scared of. There's a lot of rhetoric around DEI and how that's negative, and that's hurting us. So we definitely are seeing a pause on things.
Mm, mhm.
So I would say if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said like we're not there yet, but we're getting better. And I think right now it's actually worse than we
Okay.
were 6 months ago.
Yeah, I was really curious because I don't have my finger on the pulse anymore,
Mhm.
and I was so excited. I've given the keynote lectures on, representation in media, and it was like 3 years ago. I was like, oh my gosh, well, XYZ, and then last year I was like, hey, things are going really great, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh boy, we're kind of we're in a different in a really strange place. So,
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that, because I think this is also where, because we see shows that all those shows that you mentioned and more, and the Crazy Rich Asians, and the, even Michelle Yeoh's Everything Everywhere All at Once,
Everything
like
Girls, I love
winning
it.
Oscars and things like that, right?
Yeah.
It's still like the exception, not the rule. And
Mhm.
I think if we look at the statistics and the percentages, it just still does show, like, there is not quite the balance that we're looking for in terms of
Mhm.
equality. And I'm very grateful to creators like yourself and those that are pushing forward and always writing stories um, for us to feel represented in so many different layers, in so many different ways. So it's really exciting, and I'm hopeful that things will progress and keep going forward, and that the small step forward doesn't become like huge step backwards, and like that we're just like constantly pushing. But I think that, I like to have the clean AI thought in the same way I like to try to have the positivity of where we're at. But as somebody's an activist in Florida, I know you and I talked a little offline earlier, and I'm like, yeah, Florida is a little bit of a rough place to be sometimes, but it's that we have to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, as we have a lot of things around us that are, daunting, or that like maybe it's not the right time, or you don't get the movie made that you want or greenlit and everything, what do you kind of turn to for your kind of therapy or your self-care regimen, because I'm sure traveling around the world, writing the books, taking care of the kids, doing all these things, I'm always interested, in hearing like, what are you doing for your self-care?
Yeah, well, I will answer that in a moment. I did want to say, and this is also an answer to the question, the community has been so key and so important. At the end of the day, these are businesses. So book sales, they actually really, really matter. And for example, for the New York Times best-selling list, pre-orders matter because the New York Times bestsellers is the velocity game, like how many books are selling in a week. But that first week's launch, all the pre-orders count towards it, plus the first week sales. And so that is actually for an Asian American novel the best, most favorable time for you to hit the list. But what people don't realize is it's only hardcovers that count. And if you purchase at a local independent bookstore, which I'm very much in favor of supporting, or Barnes and Noble, local independent bookstores count double towards that list. And so local independent bookstores are enormously powerful in that way, and they count double than what Amazon would count. And Barnes and Noble is about 1.6 from what I understand. So the other thing is like ratings. Our community doesn't tend to rate on Amazon and Goodreads, but those are really powerful engines that a lot of gatekeepers look to. And so it's actually very important. Like even for like Love Boat, which is like by far my best-selling book, it has so few ratings on Amazon because no one rates. Like, but all that, like the more ratings there are, the more the algorithm will push it out. And so actually for now, I'm actually asking people like rate The Veil on like mark it as want to read on Goodreads. And then once you get the book rated on Amazon, same with my fourth novel that just came out, very, very few ratings, Kisses, Codes, and Conspiracies. Like just go on and rate, even if you don't want to write something, just give it a number, give it a 5, and then that will help like to drive traffic out further. But there's all these things that we don't do as a community because it's not part of our behavior and our culture, but it does impact the way we interact with the gatekeepers. But on the flip side, like our community has enormous buying power. And when we are channeled and focused and like are aware of ways we can help, we are really powerful together. And that's what happened with Love Boat Taipei. Why did it hit the New York Times bestseller list? One, it was a Barnes and Noble book club pick. Two, HarperCollins turned it up to an 11. They were really behind this book. And then three, the Asian American community came out for it. And that was true for the film too. The film came out during the height of the double strike in Hollywood, and the community came out to make sure it was watched widely so that the numbers and the counters on Paramount were strong. And that's why we were able to get it to Netflix worldwide. So I am super grateful to the community, and I know like that we are accomplishing really amazing things together. And as for self-care, I do love my hot tub. I love fruit. So I'm like it's like candy for me, like cotton candy grapes, cherries, like all these, like in California, we had the benefit of these interesting different types of mixes of pluots, which are plum apricot
Yeah.
combination. So I just love going to the farmer's market and just helping myself.
I love that. Thank you so much, actually, for sharing about the rating system as well as book purchase. Because for my comic creators that I speak to very frequently, like people just don't realize pre-orders is what matters like the most. Like you
Mhm.
have to get those pre-orders in. So absolutely recommend and encourage everyone to please pre-order The Veil and the hardcover because I
And
didn't
hardcover.
know that. I don't think in my mind I knew that about it quote unquote not counting, which is frustrating. So tell me then, does that mean like digital doesn't count?
So digital count towards the USA Today
Okay,
bestseller list. So Kisses,
but
Codes, and
not New York
Conspiracies.
Times.
And I do like that list because it's actually a wider list. I think it's
Okay,
actually a more accurate reflection, and the publishers agree too.
okay.
Weirdly, it doesn't have as much cachet sometimes. I think it should have more because it counts digital, it counts, I believe it counts audiobook, hardcover, paperback, and it compares you against not just your category of, say young adult children's books, but all books that are
Hmm.
selling, nonfiction as well as fiction, adult as well as children's. And so it's actually a very accurate list. Kisses, Codes, Conspiracies hit that list. So I'm very proud of that because again, I just think it's a reflection of the bigger pool.
Hmm.
But yes, hardcovers they go a long way because that's what the New York Times looks at.
I
And
see.
we actually have a pre-order in some of these are adorable stickers that were created by Third State Books.
Love it.
They're so
Love
cute.
stickers.
Yes, so you can go on my website, abigailhingwen.com/the-veil to find out more. But basically, submit your hardcover receipts before September 16th, and we will mail you one of these adorable stickers.
Oh, amazing. Yes. The stickers are fantastic and the artwork is really, really gorgeous. I think it's very endearing and it makes you feel good and all the things I think that The Veil is going to bring to readers, especially of all ages. I always tell people that just because something is a YA novel or a middle school or middle grade novel doesn't mean that we can't read it too. It just means that, age appropriate. But do you find that you have a lot of like, I don't want to say old readers, but
Love,
not
absolutely.
quite YA readers that tell you, oh
Yes.
my gosh, we're
Well,
new
I have
fans
to
of all the
re-educate people.
different.
Like, it's totally a misnomer. Young adult is what
Yeah.
adult was when we were growing up. And
Yes. Yes.
my readers for Love Boat were like a 13-year-old girl reading with her 95-year-old grandmother.
I love
So
it.
I had everybody in between. I had like a large swell of like 30, 40, 50-year-olds reading it. So definitely, when I was growing up, I think A Wrinkle in Time was considered young adult. Today, that would be considered middle grade. And then young
Yeah.
adult is basically the reason it's young adult is that it goes through a lot of first experiences, a first time away from home, first kiss,
Mhm.
first boyfriend, first heartbreak, first job. And so all those things are relatable to everybody across the spectrum. So yes, absolutely. And middle grade is my first love. My very first novel that I mentioned that I never published was a middle grade fantasy.
Okay.
And I think with middle grade, you're right. It's just the only difference is it's age appropriate. And but it this one is heavy. Like it digs into how the technology works and the ethics of it and clean AI, as we talked about. And then the parents themselves have their own storyline and their own issues that they're working through.
Yeah, I actually think this is more than just a fun fantasy book. I actually think it's quite important for that age range, maybe even younger, if parents feel comfortable reading to their kids. It's a great way. I think I want Abigail story time, by the way. I want to get in on that. I think I have, parents that tell me they still read to their children things. And I feel like it is important for them to understand AI and technology and all of these things because it's always great to learn through a fun story. Like it's this sneaky way of teaching, right? It's a little bit of a wow, no, this is fun. We're in a fantasy world. There's these fun characters and yet you're learning something along the way. That's why reading is so powerful. But I feel like this book especially will not just resonate with young readers, but I think it is actually an important thing for them to be able to see what could be, because they are also the ones that will be wielding the AI in the very near future, and we hope they
Absolutely.
will do so responsibly and have clean AI and things like that.
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, Abigail, I don't want to keep you much longer. This has been a fantastic conversation. I hope you come back to talk to me again about all other things and all of your work. But if you want to just remind everybody where to get your book, where to pre-order, where to follow you at, I want to make sure they're doing all the things.
Yeah, thank you. So, like I purchase from your local independent bookstore, Barnes and Noble. I know, like I was just in Miami, they had a Books and Gables, but I'm sure there's like Barnes and Nobles everywhere, and I'm sure you also have your local independent stores there. But The Veil is available for pre-order now. If the bookstore tells you it's not available, there's something wrong. So let me know. And you can follow me on Instagram at Abigail Hing Wen. I'm on all the social media platforms, but I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn just to a lesser extent. And then the best way really to keep in touch is to sign up for my newsletter. Again, on my website, it's abigailhingwen.com. And I'll send you information about the next time I'm visiting your town. We have some private screenings as well that I will be inviting my mailing list to. They're popping up around the country now. So get on that list and I'll send you an invite.
All right. Well, Abigail, thank you so much. Congratulations again on this phenomenal book and the short film. Excited to see that and hope we get to talk again soon.
Thank you, Mimi.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram or Facebook.